Okay, let's go ahead and call to order the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Executive Committee meeting of November 22nd, 2024 at 1:01 p.m. Director Meadows, you have a statement to say?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Chair. I am appearing remotely pursuant to AB 2449 because I'm unable to attend in person due to a physical disability, which qualifies under the Americans with Disabilities Act. There is no individual 18 years or older present in my room at my remote location.
Thank you. With that, we will have roll call.
Thank you. Chair Klein.
Present.
Vice Chair Makachuk.
Present.
Director Tyson.
Here.
Director Walia. Here. Director Meadows.
Here.
I will note that Director Martinez-Beltran is currently absent, but we do have a quorum of our.
Thank you. And Director Martinez-Beltran is supposed to be on her way and will be here soon enough. Next up is public comment on matters not listed on the agenda. This is for the public to provide comments on any matter not listed on the agenda, but still within the subject matter jurisdiction of SVCE. Speakers can have 3 minutes to speak. I have no speakers in the room. Is there any remote speakers wishing to speak under public comment?
No hands raised, Chair.
Okay, we'll move on to our consent calendar. Are there any comments on our consent calendar? One item is approving the minutes from our October 25th meeting. No comments. Is there any public comment on this item?
No public comment.
Is there a motion? Vice Chair.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes, or approve the consent calendar.
Thank you. Director Walia?
Second.
Thank you. Can we please have a vote?
Yes. Chair Klein.
Yes.
Vice Chair Makachuk.
Aye.
Director Tyson.
Yes.
Walia.
Aye.
Meadows.
Aye.
Thank you. That motion carries.
Thank you. We'll move on to our regular calendar. First up is our CEO update. Mike.
I just have a very quick update, and I know we have a very busy schedule. I just wanted to announce that we are looking to make some additional changes in the organization to better align to our mission. And so we'll be making some internal announcements next week and then forming the board of some additional staff realignments. And so a lot of this next phase, what we call phase 2 of the realignment, really is for us to improve our communication with the board and key stakeholders in our community. And so that'll be a big focus of that new group, and you guys will get to hear all about it at the board meeting after we announce it internally. That's the end of my CEO report.
Fantastic. Any comments from the board? Any public comment?
No public.
Okay. Thank you, and we all look forward to seeing at the board meeting what those changes are. Great. Our next item is item 4, SVCE information update on the 2025 SVCE board elections. Andrea? Oh, sorry, I skipped over. My fault. Item 3, CEO transition ad hoc committee report. I saw CEO twice. Director Tyson.
So let me just speak to that. The transition subcommittee met as sort of a swan song. So we met about 2 weeks ago, and we wrote a little summary of what our closing thoughts were in terms of ensuring a good CEO transition, and a lot of the focus was on the communications. And so if you just take a look at it, it's really a kind of a gentle reminder to board members and others about how we can help the staff and the CEO by making certain scheduling issues easier for them. A little reminder about the chair of subcommittees. It's useful, very useful to have that person in person most of the time. And that also the fact that subcommittees, we don't have alternates. It's sometimes challenging to make a quorum. So when you're signing up and volunteering to be in that role, that you appreciate that your attendance is even more critical. So I think that captures most of it. There's one thought toward the end, and it's something we discussed without reaching any resolution, because we wondered at some point, is it ever useful to have some kind of stipend for attendance of meetings for board members, such as some other agencies have? We did not reach a conclusion on this. We just raised it. Would that ever become something to talk about if we felt that we had any issues with engagement or attendance of directors, but we're not bringing it forward as a proposal?
Thank you. Any other comments from the subcommittee or from any of the other directors? Vice Chair.
I think that the CEO transition was designed and executed extremely well. And I think that our outgoing CEO had lots of runway. I think the transition was good, having the committee in place, the subcommittee in place, that worked really well. So I think those are leading practices, and I commend everyone. And I will make a comment on what the committee reported regarding the stipend. And my comment on that is, I can say that everything I do as part of an elected official is I don't get any reimbursement for any of the, or not reimbursed, I don't get any stipends or anything. And I like to be able to say that. So.
Thank you. Any other comments? Any member of the public wishing to speak on this item?
No hands raised, Chair.
Okay. And I just want to thank the subcommittee for their work and working with Monica. And Monica, you've done a fantastic job as far as this transition, and thank you again for the subcommittee for kind of reminding our directors on what their roles are. It is important at the end of the day to make sure that, missing quorum is a very bad thing from an operational standpoint. So that should be, reiterated as much as possible. And I definitely know that it's that balance of trying to make sure that you're doing your main job, which you might have, and then your council job and all your different jobs. But it is important for each of our organizations to have, committed people to do the recommendations to the larger board, or the larger board can't do its work. So thank you. Yes, Director Meadows, you're muted. Director Meadows, you're still muted for some reason.
Okay, sorry, I had thought I'd hit that, but so my apologies. I should have raised my hand sooner, but it occurred to me as listening to the comments. An additional point why quorum is so important. I've been under AB 2449 for the last really almost 3 months now, and without a physical quorum, I would not be able to be a participant and be able to vote and all that. So that would also put the meetings at risk. So I apologize for the pressure that puts on my colleagues. But, I didn't plan this or predict this. So it is very important to have the physical in-person quorum.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, we will now move on. To item 4, SVCE. SVCE information update on the 2025 SVCE board elections. Andrea?
Yes, thank you. Great segue into this item. So it's hard to believe we're already almost at the end of the year, but this is around the time we start to socialize our plans for next year and appointing our board chair, vice chair, in addition to our committees. So we're going to go over what that will look like for 2025 for us. So in January, we make our appointments for the board chair, our board vice chair, and this committee, the executive committee. So that would entail letters of interest being submitted to me to include in our board packet for the board's consideration for a vote at our January meeting. Again, we'll be appointing our executive committee members at that time, so I would also request that anyone interested in continuing to be on this committee or anybody else on the board interested in joining this committee, let me know by December 31st. No letter needed for the committee, but for the board chair and vice chair, a letter would be great. And again, those selections will be made in January at that board meeting. Come February, all of our other committee appointments will be made. So that is our audit committee, our finance and administration committee, any additional ad hoc committees that are created between now and then. And so shortly after our board meeting in January, I'll be sending out communication to all of our board on our committees, descriptions of these committees, membership, who's served on it, et cetera, for information. Also requesting that they let me know if they're interested in joining these committees for 2025. I'll compile that info, have that ready for our packet, and then we will go to a vote at the board meeting in February. So we are requesting that I be notified prior to, but in the past, we have accepted nominations from the floor as well. So that is an option, but strongly suggested that you let us know beforehand. So a quick snapshot. Next month, you'll be hearing a presentation very similar to this to the full board, where I will officially ask for these things to be submitted by December 31st. Again, that's board chair, vice chair, and this committee. And then we'll request that the committee interests be received by January 31st for inclusion in our February 12th packet. With that, I am happy to answer any questions about the process, the timeline, committees.
Thank you. Questions, Director Walia?
Thank you, Andrea. So what are the committees that you're looking for in February?
So that would be our Finance and Administration Committee, our Audit Committee, and currently we don't have any ad hoc committees yet, but potentially we may have one, so.
Have we had any ad hoc committees for 2024?
Yes, we had the Legislative Transition Ad hoc Committee.
The legislative and transition ad hoc.
Okay, so legislative. How many years have you had the legislative as an ad hoc committee?
I would say it's been 3-ish years now.
I don't know, we'd have to ask Bennett.
Any reason to continue it as an ad hoc? Why not make it a regular committee?
I think part of the reason is some of the discussions that we have in the legislative committee are quite sensitive in terms of our strategy that we want to take in with respect to position for certain bills. And so having it as an ad hoc doesn't require us to be a Brown Acted committee meeting. And so that's been the reason to keep it as ad hoc.
But the downside is then the board members don't get to really understand that information. I mean, putting that information in the board packet is not quite the same. That's why I'm thinking. I hear your reason, I understand it. There is a balance between the two.
We could certainly bring more information to the board as related to just general strategy in our policy platform and what's happening to bills. But in terms of talking candidly about taking a position on a bill or a strategy around a bill, I don't know if we could have that discussion easily in board.
I'm not talking strategy, I'm talking of the bills, that information.
Yeah, that we can certainly do.
Because that is very important for all the board members to have. And just like the work of all the other committees actually does get to be public for all the board members.
And
I think they can be more effective. That's my thought.
Yeah, I think Bennett has an item scheduled for December or January.
December, she'll have a closeout of that committee where she'll be reporting out some of the main topics that
The whole
were
board.
discussed.
Yeah, but that's end of the year. That doesn't help someone who's not on the ad hoc committee. That doesn't help that person be as effective all along. And I understand the strategy concern. I just generally feel ad hoc committees for a limited duration for a specific person are effective, but beyond that, they have a positive, but they also have a negative with them. So those are my thoughts.
Other comments from the directors? Being none, is there any member of the public wishing to speak on this item?
No hands raised, Chair.
Okay. With that, we will close that item. Thank you. We'll move on to item 5, recommend approval of the fiscal year 2024-2025 budget update.
Okay, thank you. So. Okay, so go over the agenda. I will, as you mentioned, Chair Klein, go over the updated budget projections. If you remember, the board adopted the budget for this for fiscal year 24-25 in September. But as we've done in the last few years, we come back with an updated projection in this time when we usually have more certainty on what the PCIA and PG&E rates would be. So that's the purpose today. And this is an action item. We do ask that you recommend the board approve the updated budget. So the way I'll go about the presentation is I'll go over the highlights of the new budget assumptions and recap the adopted budget assumptions, compare the two budgets. We'll also go through a reserve projection, how our 5-year reserve projection looks like. And then normally this time of the year is when we discuss looking at how the financials look like. We talk about funding additional areas of the business. I'm calling it here strategic priorities, but this is an opportunity. As I'll go into the discussion, you'll see that now that we're meeting and in some cases exceeding our reserve target, this is time to start thinking about funding some of our longer-term mission-aligned strategic priorities. So I will table this with this presentation, but the discussion will be the next agenda item, and so we will lead. And then I will talk about why there's some additional uncertainty with this year's budget, updated budget. Okay, so that's the plan. Just a quick reminder of the timeline. We always will have another attempt at the budget, at the media budget, when we do the full budget update. This December update that the board will approve in December, you are reviewing today, updates primarily for the revenue forecast, accounting for the new anticipated PG&E rates, PG&E generation rates, and PCIA rates. And as always, we update our power supply cost assumptions as well to reflect current market assumptions. We will also review this in detail with the Finance and Admin Committee, and the committee is meeting this coming Monday. Okay, so now the recap of the current adopted budget that the board adopted in September. Remember, we said at the time we were using conservative estimates to forecast our revenues. We said that big uncertainty is when the CPUC's energy division publishes market price benchmarks. And usually they publish those prices in the fall, and there's a lot of uncertainty as to how those prices will come out. For energy prices, we use market forward data that we have, but RA and RPS prices, there's no liquid transparent forward prices. And also the CPUC's MPV methodology uses actually a look back of how parties have transacted in these products, RA and RPS. For example, RA, they look at prices that load serving entities have committed to from September of 2023 to August of 2024. So we don't know how each party's submittal of prices will be and how CPUC will reflect them. But nevertheless, we did an estimate. We said, let's attempt to do a forecast of what we think the MPVs may come out at. And based on that estimate, when we presented the budget to the board, we said there's an potential upswing in revenues of $145 million, namely if higher RA and RPS prices were adopted, that we think will likely be adopted because of what we had seen in the market for these prices for these resources. But we also said that there was some uncertainty because PG&E was knowing that this was going to be the case. PG&E was actively asking the commission to actually cap the RA prices at last year's level. So in developing the budget, we had used last year's RA and RPS MPV prices, which we had done in prior years too. But as I said, we attempted to do a forecast, and based on that forecast, we thought the budget would had a potential to improve by $145 million. In that budget, the board adopted a 4% customer discount, which is generally what we've been giving in the last few years, and also 1% of customer discounts translated in dollar bill credits to low-income customers. We've been doing it in the last few years. So those were the assumptions we adopted. So where are we today? So the CPUC's energy division issued market prices in October, and then they made 2 subsequent corrections to them. So based on the latest market prices that they've adopted, we, instead of seeing an upswing of $145 million, we have an upswing of $85 million. So RA and RPS MPVs are higher than the adopted budget, but the bigger reason is for the decline in MPV is actually due to declining energy prices. energy prices this year have been coming down significantly. So then now with this update, we're showing that the net contribution to reserve increases from 14 million to about 97 million. Okay. And the reserves, and I'll go into this in details, are now projected to be over 350 for this year, but well below the maximum cap of 500 days of cash on hand. And there are some uncertainties due to the delays with the issuance of the MPVs and the subsequent corrections that the Energy Division made, which delayed basically PG&E updating its ERA forecast. So that PG&E may have more updates that we have not been, that's not reflected in this budget update. And also normally we have, when PG&E does this update, we have a new gen model that we use to forecast and estimate rates. That model gets updated. At the time we prepared this presentation, it was not updated. 2 days ago, we got an updated model, and I'll talk about the impact of that update. So here's how the adjusted budget or the updated budget compares with the adopted budget in September. You can see the big difference is the 85 million in revenue.
No, we're not seeing that slide.
Oh, because I didn't. Sorry.
That was a test.
Yeah.
You can see my screen. So the 85 million, you can see that in big circle there. And the other adjustments, the non-operating revenue, that's just it because now we project more bottom line, so our investment income grow as we have more income. And then the two other adjustments we made is we trued up the program fund. Per board adopted resolution, we direct 2% of our revenues to programs fund each year. So to the 1.7 million increase is to account for the updated revenue forecast. And then the other line item adjustment is the customer bill credit, the 1% dollar equivalent that we translate into bill credits for low-income customers because the rates are now higher than what we had assumed in the adopted budget, so that funding increases as well. So our projected bill credit for low-income customers is close to $17 based on the current number of customers we have in the low-income category. And power supply expenses, not much change, 3 million increase. You may say, well, I'm saying prices are coming down, so how come that didn't come down? The reason for that is there were other updates, portfolio updates, where we account for BPA uncertainty and updated conditions, as well as if you at the last board meeting, the board approved purchase of additional clean energy resources. Okay. So this is a busy slide, but this basically shows all the movements in a graphical form that I talked about. The blue box is the rate that we charge the customer in 2024. The reason I'm calling it a blended rate is if you remember, we had a rate increase in January, but in July, PG&E's rate came down. So this is sort of an average of that rate. The adopted budget is the next column. The estimated budget that we said, based on our estimate of RARPS prices, the one we said showed the potential increase in revenue of 145 million. And now the updated, it's lower because the MPVs came in lower as energy prices have come down. So you can see from the adopted budget, that's the 85, that's contributing to the 85 million upswing in revenues, but 60 million lower than what we had anticipated. Okay.
While you're still on that slide, you see, with the prices going down, I would have expected the PCIA to go up, but I also saw that the rates went up. So is that why the PCIA net went down?
So PCIA went up relative to the budget, the second column.
Yes.
Because we were using last year's RA and RPS prices. But but RE and RPS prices, as we said, was going to come in higher. They did come in higher, not quite to the level we were estimating, slightly lower, but still higher than last year's levels. So that's the reason why the PCIA came down. It more than offset the decline in energy prices. Yeah.
I don't know the appropriate point to ask this question, but I know that PG&E has a memo account because they've been over collecting on their revenue side. What happens when they to us when they reverse that, and maybe that isn't in their generation rate? And maybe this is a little too much in the weeds, but I don't know.
It's okay. That's called the ERA account.
Oh, that's the ERA. Okay.
And it's in the staff report, Energy Resource Recovery account. So that's what these updates reflect. The PG&E gen rate is basically PG&E did its ERA forecast update. They probably will issue another update. The latest MPVs that the Energy Division published on the 5th of November. And they will also true this number up again. They trued it up to, I believe, September, and they will true it for the months of October, probably up to November, even after the CPUC meeting in December, when they file the AET advice letter, the annual electric true up. So there's some updates coming, but yeah, so this largely reflects that ERA update, which also updates the PCIA. There's also a PCIA balancing account similar to ERA that also gets trued up.
So it's a trailing adjustment for them, and whatever, they're the dog, we're the tail, so whatever it is, whatever goes through them, goes through to us.
For PCIA, yes, and then for their customers' generation rate. So basically, they forecast a rate. So let's say their rate for next year, 2025, is 14.76 cents for PG&E customers on average.
Yeah.
So they establish that rate, and then they have a memo account, like you said, and whatever their actual expenses are, they will record against that. It's either a positive or a negative balance. So if it's a positive balance, in other words, they've over-collected, then that means their rates will come down, which is not good for us.
The following
year.
Right. There's
As they're doing now.
intergenerational thing with,
Right.
yeah.
As they're doing now for 2024.
Right.
Trued it up in this last ERA update, I believe to September, maybe August. And then they'll probably do another true up in the AET, probably for October to November. And from December till next October, we'll have another forecast update in May. They do a preliminary ERA forecast, and then they do the October update.
Thank you.
And correspondingly, there's another, it's called PAVA, the balancing account for PCIA functions similarly. So if these rates were to prevail, again, there's uncertainty as to the final rates the PUC will adopt. But what does this mean for our customers? On average, if you look at our customers will pay the blue box plus the orange box. You know, the blue box is times the megawatt hours is our revenue. PCIA is what PG&E collects from our customers. So you can see on average, this is on average, right? So some customers may have an increase, some will have a decrease. On average, you can see the rates that are currently in place. This reflects the rates that went into effect in July. PG&E's rates on average came down by about 11%. You can see on average, if these rates were to prevail, our customers' rates will actually be slightly lower, 2.1% on average. Okay, let's get to the fun topic of how our reserve projection looks like. So you can see for the first time, I think, we are actually forecasted for the fiscal year ending that we will be exceeding our days cash on hand target. In September, we updated, the board adopted the reserve target of 350 days of cash on hand. We're projecting for the end of this fiscal year will be at 382. Now you see two bars. one bar, the lighter blue, is basically we have funding that has been allocated to programs and has set aside 20 million for the building fund. Obviously, those are not spent yet. So the blue bar, say, accounts for the unspent dollars, which the board at any time can reverse. So when we look at liquidity, financial liquidity, we look at both metrics. But what our reserve policy is governed by is basically taking out what I'm now calling earmarked funds. So these are funding that the board has set aside for programs like the building fund, and that's the darker blue shade. So this shows that this projection shows that we're exceeding for this fiscal year, and we're likely to exceed for the upcoming 5 years, but approaching the upper target. But the sad news is, I said the the consulting models that we
Wait,
use.
you were saying good news, good news.
Still good on the overall perspective. They updated their model, and when we, yesterday when we ran the model, we noticed that 2025 is still projected to be the same. But from 26 to 27, it's going to be closer to our target of 350 days. And the last fiscal year displayed here, it's actually going to drop down to, I think, about 300 days of cash on hand. So that's projected to be a negative year. Again, these are future forecasts and subject to a lot of uncertainties. But the point is, we're getting at a point where we're in a good fiscal financial position. We're in a good financial position. So that leads me to my next slide and next topic of discussion is that this is a good time now to think about funding some of our mission-aligned longer-term strategic priorities. For this fiscal year, if the forecast prevails, we'd be at 382 days. That's 32 days above the days cash on hand target. That's about $40 million in dollar terms. So what we are saying is, as I mentioned, Joey's going to lead us through a presentation next on the agenda item as to how we should fund these strategic priorities. But the approach that we're recommending is that when we exceed our target days of cash on hand, then we basically set that money aside in this fund, which Zoe has called Affordable Clean Community Fund. So the approach we are recommending is that we do this at the end of the fiscal year. So which is around the time when we do the December update, like right around this time of the year, when we know pretty much how the prior fiscal year is going to close. Even though the books have not officially closed, we have pretty good indication as to how they're going to close. So now if we look at that and say, let's say we are over target, then we can come to the board and say, let's direct those funding into the ACC fund. And for the then current fiscal year, we can also look at how much certainty we have in the budget forecast. If we feel very confident and we think we're also going to exceed for that year, we may direct some fund. We can also wait till mid-year. But generally, we want to do this at the end of the fiscal year based on actual performance. And these are funding longer-term strategic priorities, so it's not like immediately the funds will be withdrawn. And all of that could be taken into consideration.
You'd earmark some funds.
Yes. But for this current fiscal year, we are not recommending any funding yet. We can revisit this in the mid-year budget. The reason for that is there's a lot of uncertainty with the rates that the PUC may adopt for this fiscal year. Talk about that in the next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, PG&E continues to propose capping RA MPVs, even though when they first did this, the judge, the ALJ, Administrative Law Judge, basically ruled that these arguments are out of scope for this proceeding. They may warrant discussion. We can bring this into a new proceeding. PG&E, you can bring this, consider this in a new proceeding, or we can reopen the PCIA proceeding, but they don't belong in this proceeding. But despite that, PG&E still, in its update, recommends freezing the RA MPVs. They even created 3 scenarios, and they're making additional arguments that it's creating cost shift, which we do not believe is the case. We think the judge is likely still going to. The judge is still saying this is out of scope, and let's hope. And we don't know how the proposed decision will come out. Expected later this month. And we also don't know how the CPUC will rule, right? CPUC may be sympathetic to PG&E's arguments. They may freeze rates. They may want to moderate rate increases for bundled customers. So there's all these uncertainty that we have to take into account. So for these reasons, we're saying let's not fund the ACC right now. Let's wait until we have more certainty.
I'll make a comment. There's an immense amount of political pressure for rates to go down, and for them to reduce their true up and not allow it to flow through, or to allow it to flow through.
Yeah, that's
There's
They're supposed to be
immense.
impartial to the bundled versus the unbundled, and it's definitely in favor of the bundled. So.
And the second bullet I pretty much covered, and the last bullet I also covered that, there'll be further, potentially PG&E will make further additional balancing account adjustments to the ERA fund. PUC decision likely in this end of December or close to end of December, mid-December, but then PG&E will after that will make the AET advice letter in late December. So with this budget, we are recommending we stay with the 4% customer discount rate and the 1% direct to bill credits for low-income customers. And for low-income customers, there's a slide in the appendix. On average, if you combine with overall discount, they're getting about 44% discounted rate. The discount that's also built into the T&D rate.
And that's if they would be with PG&E versus us.
That's combined. Our generation rate combined with what they're getting on T&D.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll just go to that slide quickly.
So basically 44% below market rate, right?
Versus the regular US customer.
Yeah.
44%.
So you can see our bill credits, the Care customers column, that's the low-income customers. You can see in 2025, we are giving estimated monthly savings versus PG&E would be about $20 from us. When we combine it with the lower T&D rate that they pay, if you look at the PG&E delivery rate, their rate is quite a bit higher, almost half.
I know you're showing on the laptop, but could you reference it here?
It's up there.
So sorry, you're looking at the SVCE Res Cara Fera, right?
Yeah, that's the low income. If you look at the PG&E delivery rate, you can see it's about 12.5 cents versus 28 cents for average res customer. So when you combine with our discount and the discount they're getting on T&D, it's about 44% lower. Okay, so I will go back to the recommendations slide. So again, this budget, we have the rate of 4% discount and the 1% and the bill credit for low-income customers. And when the way we'll adjust the rates is when the PG&E's rates are published, the month that they're effective, we will make our rate changes. We ask for some time. It takes us 2-3 weeks to get it into our billing system. And then let's say the rates go in effect in January, when we have the rates, we will come back to the board with the final rates. Don or customer, maybe Justin will do this. Okay, with that, any questions? And if not, we will ask that you recommend the board approve this.
I asked my questions online as you were going through. Thank you very much for answering those.
Questions? So one question I did have, and it might go on to the next problem, next issue, but and I've heard this, let's say incidentally, from a few community members that some of the lower income residents that are with Carafera, but get behind in their bills, and ultimately it's $15, you look at it, it's like $100 a month, but conceivably they're making decisions between food and rent and electricity, whether or not there conceivably would be, and this is what some of the churches are doing or anything of that nature, to do emergency stopgap to help specific low-income families, because it's that reduced rate. It's an equity issue, especially conceivably when we have additional funds, and something that is not to say reduce the rate over a long term, but if we're talking about people that are either about to be kicked out of their homes or to have their electricity turned off, or it's like conceivably walking away and nobody gets anything, they're like, okay, we're moving out of the area, we're moving to a different part of California, out of the state, just because we can't make ends meet. Is there some possibility in looking at funding for that? And I don't think that there's a program for that. That's basically community interest groups and all that are doing that within the communities. It's like, and I look at that, I look at that, the spreadsheet of like, okay, it's still, on average this much, but you start looking at, that's a lot of money for some families. I'm just bringing that up and not sure how this is. Is this a next discussion? Is this something that conceivably we look across our area of expertise, within the jurisdictions that are part of SVCE, and say, we'll try to help out, especially as PG&E rates continue to fly up, and maybe they'll go down, but it's especially for families getting behind, let's say behind in payments, and how they respond to that. It's been very, it's like, whether or not it's food, whether or not, it's like there's all these different components that people are dealing with that make it difficult. And PG&E raising its rates has helped us, but there's only so much that, there's only so much that families can do. Like they can't cut, electricity a certain amount. And I love it's like keeping on track where we are right now, and the 4% discount across the board, and what we're doing with the positive, what we're doing with the funds that we have to apply to different programs to decarbonize and all that. That being said, it's an equity issue, and we can talk about it at the next one, but I didn't know if it was important here or at the next item.
I think it's probably here.
Okay.
Yeah, because this really is not, we don't really address that particular element in the proposal for creating this fund. But I think where we probably can address this is in the affordability kind of platform that we're trying to develop. And so if you recall, we came to the board, I think like in August, September, with the first kind of discussion about affordability and what it means, and trying to mechanically, lay out what the situation is. And, but we never defined affordability. Affordability is really kind of unique to the individual. Right. And so, but along with that, we've been working internally. We have a Tiger team together to kind of understand the problem and then establish or define some strategies, whether it be legislative, regulatory, advocacy type work, or discounts, programs, including, how do we get less usage for some of these households so that they don't have as big a bill as well. So that's all on the table. We also have to be very cognizant that as an organization, whatever we do and however we spend money has to be for the benefit of all of our customers as well. So very cognizant of that. But if customers don't pay their bill, that's not a good thing either, right? For anyone. Right. So we want to make sure that we take that all into consideration. We don't have a schedule yet for when we'll bring things back to the board with respect to affordability, but that's what we're working on right now internally. And so, but maybe we can fast track it a little bit, because we know it's very much an important issue to a lot of our communities, especially the ones that live in disadvantaged areas. So I know Zoe's part of that team, so we'll certainly kind of come back and come up with a schedule on what we'll bring to the board in this area.
I appreciate that, and that's one of the things that we're doing from a city standpoint is funding basically a rental assistance program for those people that are about to lose their apartments. And it's like, okay, and we can't do it for tons of families, but to get them through, let's say, a difficult period where they've had some additional bills, and all of a sudden, it's like, because once they're unhoused, it's that much harder to get them housed again. Similarly here, it's like, okay, if it's between electricity, food, and rent, and at some point, it's just too much. So I appreciate, it's trying to figure out how we can, let's say, do stopgap measures for certain.
And making sure that we get the right information out there too, because PG&E has services available to people who can't pay their bills. So making sure that that information is out there too, because ultimately PG&E makes the decision, right, on a lot of this stuff, so.
Thank you.
I'll just say we're in the midst also internally of planning some education campaign, kind of outreach around the goal of enrolling customers and making them aware of the programs. Things are happening, but yeah, great points.
Great. Thank you. Director Wally?
Thank you, Chair Klein. Thank you for bringing that up. I certainly can understand the differences in the communities as we were talking during lunchtime. Communities, cities, the budgets are very different, and sometimes perceptions can be very different. And so in addition to what Chair Klein said here, I've talked so many times in my community in the city of Saratoga, we have 1/3 seniors, and there are quite a few of those who have owned their homes for 40, 50, 60 years. They are cash poor, and their needs with age of higher electricity bills rises, especially in the wintertime. I see them. In the summertime, they don't use it because they don't realize they need to use more air conditioning, and some homes don't even have that. It's a separate challenge. But in wintertime, I personally know a lot of, so I know SVCE does a lot of work, but do just reminding again, I know you don't need a reminder, you have been fabulous at the outreach education, and to keep in mind their communities, residents like that, because they get stretched when their bills are beyond $1,000 a month. For them, that's a lot. I know people who will really cut down on food because they don't have a choice, and they don't fall into the rental assistance and all of that. But it's a very
Just to underscore your point, I have heard that with the new administration, the COLA adjustment for Social Security or whatever, or that a lot of people are on, is going to get reduced or get eliminated.
and Medicare.
Yeah, which will put increasing pressure on those folks. But then again, on the program side, if we have some money to help with reducing your electricity load, that's a good thing. And then, anyways.
Yeah. And changing the behavior that we have talked so many times, it is so hard for a lot of people need reminders to cut down the load.
And this, just again to second what Justin said on the outreach, because anyone who's living on Social Security qualifies for CareFera, but often it takes people a while. It can take a little while to get the applications up and running. People may not know about it, so making sure the very first thing is that they're on the discounted rate. If they're living on Social Security, they do qualify.
Saratoga would be just, quite a few people will be just outside of that. That's why that's that missing group that you won't see in the regular ways of slicing and dicing data, but they are stretched and they won't talk about it. So you have to know them personally to know that that is a challenge for them.
Director Martinez-Beltran.
Thank you. I'm curious to know with the campaign, I imagine that it does cover different languages and, is that coming in the bill? Is that online? Is it maybe customers that have used the CareFera before, or how are we reaching people?
Yeah, and I'm definitely speaking, I was just getting the update on this week, so it's definitely, in the works, getting planned. Just wanted to share that it's there. But the intent would be to target folks who are already on the rate or taking advantage of some of these programs, and also those who are not, who we think could be eligible, or seniors with fixed incomes who maybe wouldn't be eligible even for CareFera, a lot of these resources are still, very helpful for them in terms of energy efficiency, availability, in terms of understanding a little bit more about your time of use rate, and that actually if you can push some of your load into a different time, you can actually save some money. So there's a lot of programs that are out there, other payment assistance plans that PG&E offers. I think we were talking about multiple languages as well. So I mean, that's kind of all in the tactics of the marketing campaign. And so that's Pam and her team are all over that. But yes, that's the plan, is to kind of start pushing it out.
Okay, and then I'm sure you'll have some type of a social media or something. That would be great if we could get that in another language. I have lots of who will follow me in Spanish, so I often will translate stuff myself. It's very labor intensive, and I would not want to approach that with SVCE's items, too technical. So that would be helpful. And then I would suggest on the bills, when you're sending them right where the bill is, if somebody is language challenged, that would probably be the best place, just a couple of words in a different language to catch their eye, so.
Yeah, bills, obviously, since those are kind of done joint with PG&E, we
Yeah,
have some less control, but yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any member of the public wishing to speak on this item?
No hands raised, Chair.
Is there a motion? Vice Chair.
I'll make a motion to, what's the exact wording that I need?
Move staff recommendation.
To recommend to the Board of Directors that they approve the updated fiscal year 2024-2025 operating budget.
Chair. Director Wallace, thank you. Can we have the vote?
Chair Klein?
Yes?
Vice Chair Makachuk?
Aye.
Director Tyson?
Yes.
Director Walia?
Aye.
Director Martinez-Beltran?
Aye.
Director Meadows?
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. With that, we'll move on to item 6, establish the Affordable Clean Community Fund. Zoe?
Wait, can I have my little clicker?
Oh, it's
I'll hold up the
Okay.
presentation shortly.
Fantastic. With all the great tee-up from Amrit and conversation, it's like clear we're really excited to have this. This is a discussion item. It's really meant as a discussion, but I also want to just say this is something that staff has been working on really for several months. At least 6 months, we've been having conversations about knowing, looking ahead, that this is going to be a time that we came to. I am here presenting, but it's really been across organization to put together this proposal, put together the thinking. Every single one of the directors, the organization was very involved in thinking through this. And many are here, so it'll help kind of guide the conversation and answer questions too. So I'm going to go through this. I'm sure there'll be lots, so I'll look to our chair to help us stay on time, although we are very interested in your input. Okay, again, this is a discussion item, no action here. Lots to talk about. So we have broken this into 4 sections. Why we're needing this fund, which Amrit really laid out, but I'll go into just also some of the ways that this can help us with overarching strategic direction and help us plan in what is always an uncertain industry. It's just the nature of what we do, but we have to, within this uncertainty, still make strategic decisions so that we can really ensure that we're being wise with our investments and making these community impacts. It's a big responsibility we take very seriously. So I'll go over that briefly. And then I'll talk about the funding priorities, the buckets of areas. There are 3. We're framing all of this and thinking all of this of how we can ensure that we support an affordable and accessible energy transition for as much of our community as possible. So I'll talk about those buckets and about how much money we think we need to make an impact in each. And then we'll go through the funding allocations, which is how we would divide up the money, right? So again, these are things we've put out ideas here, but we look forward to having a conversation and then kind of using that $40 million as an illustrative example to give a sense of what that would look like. And then at the very end, we'll talk about some of the implementation process, accounting overview, those things. And I'll pause after section 2, after section 3, and then again after section 4 to take kind of questions and comments, since it's a lot to go through. Okay. All right. So I said some of this, but strategic direction from the board will enable us to grow and the impact of our strategic community investments. We operate in a budget context that is always fluctuating month to month and year to year. But overall, we can see the trend lines that Amrit laid out, that we are now in a healthy position and we're moving up to a healthier position. So we won't have great certainty ever about what is to come, but at the same time, we want to make sure that we're planning and preparing so that we can be wise and responsible with investments. All of this is based on meeting our mission, which is to reduce the dependence on fossil fuels by providing carbon-free, affordable, and reliable electricity and innovative programs for the SVCE community. So as staff, we took that mission, said, okay, as we are approaching, exceeding our reserve targets, what are the strategic initiatives that need investment to ensure that we can actually meet that mission, right? It's a big, complicated mission. We are making strides, but we have a long way to go. So we are at this inflection point. We've spoken already today about this first. We're reaching our reserve targets that allows us to even have this conversation. At the same time, increasing electric bills underscore the need for SVCE to have consistent discounts. I do not want to overstate this here. We cannot solve the affordability issue all on our own. It would be irresponsible and to think that was the case, so we don't want to overpromise. At the same time, one, for the nature of our competitive business, it's important for us to have this consistency, and also important for us to do what it is that we can on the on-bill affordability, right? And kind of make that consistent going forward. Number 3, new air district policies at a regional level and then soon at a state level are going to exponentially increase the demand for heat pumps. And we want to really ensure that as we move from early adopters to mainstream pollution-free appliances, that this is a transition that works for all, right? That it's not on the backs of businesses and on low and moderate income folks, but really that there is the support in place so that we can reduce pollution, move to climate-friendly communities in a way that's accessible and affordable for everyone. And then, as we've had lots of conversations in previous meetings, the evolving market conditions in the power supply market are making it more and more difficult to hit our clean targets. And all of this really amplifies the need for new technologies, things that can be clean 24/7, 365 for local developments, new types of solutions that can ensure that our supply is affordable and reliable over the long term. So those are really the 3 areas that we're focusing on. And then again, your direction is going to ensure that instead of thinking about this on an annual basis, we can really think about this long term, right? Start thinking about 5, 7 years, even 10 years of impact. How do we grow in that kind of way? So we're talking about that, but of course, just at the flip side of that is that the board always retains authority to shift direction if circumstances change. So we're looking for this long-term strategic direction, but that doesn't change that ability to kind of make changes to those priorities or funding investments at any time. Okay. So again, by investing in these 3 priority areas, we cannot do this all on our own, right? This energy transition is way beyond just SVCE. At the same time, we do have a level of resources, position, and expertise that if we are wise and thoughtful with our investments, we can make an outsized impact. And we really can do our best part to ensure that this transition is affordable and accessible in the short, medium, and long term. We mentioned this piece a little bit. This is a reminder of the process here, that each year, this would be an annual process. Funds above reserve policy targets would be identified as part of the board process and then be determined which allocations would potentially go into this type of fund. You mentioned we're going to working assumption around 40 million. Okay, so we think that this 3-pronged approach, it does not encompass every area of action, but what we focused on is the areas of action where we have, one, the greatest direct control and the greatest ability to really make a full impact. So obviously, we invest directly in emerging power supply technologies. We can move the market by saying that we can setting aside funds to say we're going to invest above market cost in things that will drive a cleaner and more affordable future long term. Things like advanced geothermal, just kind of as an example. I'm going bottom to top for whatever reason right now. Scalable support for pollution-free appliances. I keep thinking of this is the affordability challenge that's around the corner that we need to start preparing for right now, and that we actually have the ability to make a big difference on. So that is not to minimize the importance of affordable bills, because that's something that we need to change as a state and as a region. But we know that within a few years that this issue of upfront costs of this transition are going to be fore of mind for people. So let's start getting ready now. And we already spoke about the importance of that discount and also the discount stabilization, which is important for our businesses, but also for residents, right? That kind of level of certainty is often just as important as kind of the amount of the bill that's there that you can kind of plan for. So those are the three priorities. I'm going to go through each of these and the target that we're setting, and then I will pause for questions because I know we've already said a lot, but
If I could.
Yeah, go ahead.
So this is, we're not making a decision on this. This is for information only. This is the direction that you're going in.
This is a discussion. Yeah, this is to bring.
Discussion.
Feedback, no.
Yeah. I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page.
Yes, this is a discussion. So, we will lay out, you'll see in the section where we have proposal, but this is meant for discussion. We know that it's a big, important decision, and we want to hear your input. Thank you for clarifying that again. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of these. So first is discount stabilization. And to say simply here, our recommendation is to build up a fund that would ensure that we could maintain today's discount. I call it 5%, but we know it's the 4% plus the 1% for 3 years, which would cost SVCE about $75 million. So that would be the goal, to set aside enough funding, earmark funding, that we would have be able to guarantee that level of discount even in hard, difficult years. Yeah.
Just
Very quick.
Yeah, very quick, because you're saying each 1% discount is this column number 2, and column number 3, you're talking total 5% discount.
That's right. We just wanted to sort of break it out there, and so you would have the information to play around with.
So we're talking two separate things.
Yes, but we're overarching talking about setting aside enough money to ensure the 5% target discount for 3 years.
Thanks.
Yeah. Scalable support for pollution-free appliances. So similar, we think that the first 3 years of any regulation, whether they happen through BACMED or they happen at the state level, are going to be the most difficult years, and the years where they're going to need the most support to provide resources. So we recognize the overarching cost of this, given the scale that we're talking about, really probably needs to be a combination of rebates and financing. And so we ran several different kind of scenarios, playing around with how could we provide support for up to 100% of those transitions. And our estimate is that it would be about $30 million a year for a combination of rebates, financing, and kind of some other small supportive programs once these air district rules go into effect. So if we wanted to have it set aside for those 3 years to say that, hey, SVCE is here to ensure that we're going to have support for as many customers as possible in this transition, we would want to set aside about $90 million. Okay. And finally, a local and emerging power supply. So again, the real importance here, thinking long-term, we need new types of technology, long duration storage batteries, all these sorts of things that are emerging where we may want to actually start investing above market costs gonna be candid, this is a high-level estimate because the nature of emerging technology is that it's difficult to come up with exact figures. But doing kind of the best due diligence that could be done, Pro looked at kind of a range of options that are out there. And we think about $100 million is a reasonable amount to target for this level of fund. So this is, again, I'm going to just summarize. This is a discussion item. This is the first portion of the discussion, which is the target areas, the target amounts and the priority areas. So I'll pause for conversation. After this, we'll go into discussion of different ways the funds could be allocated on an annual basis. So this slide summarizes what we've said so far.
Any questions, comments? It's pretty, Vice Chair.
I was gonna ask about the affordability for small and medium-sized businesses, and it seems like we're focused almost entirely on our residential customers. Do you have any comments on that? Is it? I know you talked about the C&I customers.
The discount stabilization and the support for pollution-free appliances would also be for small, medium businesses. It'd be for all customer types.
Okay. And then can you speak at all about the affordability requirements that we SVCE have in our service territory versus other CCAs, other jurisdictions?
You're asking what our discount is?
No. What's, like, if you say we've got X amount of pressure on affordability here and we're trying to do something through this fund, what are other CCAs, or is their pressure higher on their customers higher than ours? Are we the middle of the pack? Are we lower? And what are they doing, if anything?
That's a good question. I don't think we've measured that. I think it would be one metric that we could use would be what % of our customers are DAC or meet some kind of criteria relative to other CCAs. But that's not something that we've looked at carefully.
Yeah, we are,
Disadvantaged communities.
Okay.
we don't have a lot of DAC customers. And we're a very, very wealthy service area relative to other CCAs.
Right. And this goes back to defining what affordability means, right? Because it could be a function of disposable income. And when you're in Silicon Valley, in our area, you have higher rents, right? So even though we don't have as many low income customers, we do have high income or high rate rental
Or
rates.
housing burnout.
So that's part of what we're trying to define. But I think to your direct question, we don't have that estimate relative to other CCAs.
Okay.
It's a good question.
I wrote down a quote, affordability is unique to the individual. I will remember that one. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you. Director Walia?
Thank you, Chair Klein. So quick question, when we are talking these dollar amounts, which are massive, $90 million for 3 years for scalable support for pollution-free appliances, what does that translate into how many homes? Because in our service territory, we have a lot of residences, a lot of old stock, and you have been talking recently, thank you, Zoe, that we need to get rewiring done as soon as possible.
Yep.
I mean, any of us, I know George won't like this, and so I won't repeat the quote, though I think he does need to hear. Los Altos Hills has rich folks. Saratoga seemingly has, that's the perception. There are a lot of people, when their appliances need to be switched, and this was talked about at Cities Association last week when Councilmember Pat Wood from Palo Alto pointed out the stage end of life versus the burnout. Because most people will wait for burnout, and at that time, just the rewiring costs. So bottom line is, what is the number from this huge dollar amount that we're talking? What would it translate to?
Fantastic. Around 10,000 homes a year. And so this is a really good key point. We haven't talked about this as recently. You might sometimes remember some of the slides that we've shown in our board updates of this big uptick that we expect, and we can show briefly in a moment, right? Yeah. So right now we're working with early adopters and folks that are switching to electrification because they are interested in doing so, often because they like new technologies and to help the climate, right? Mm-hmm. And so we have funding for about 750, I think, heat pump water heaters a year. That's about what we're seeing. But the estimate is that when BACMed rules go into effect or state rules go into effect, that the demand would be around 10,000, right? And so that's a huge uptick in a few number of years. And then also we're talking about a completely different group of people, small businesses, right? Because this is also encompasses anybody who's got a small water heater, right? And so I think the point is probably all of those people have just the same amount of interest in reducing pollution, but maybe have less ability or interest in paying that upfront cost, which is $3,000 to $4,000 more in most instances, right? And so we're in this great position right now where there's rebate programs that allow for those small early movers. But the question is, as we want to move from early adopters to mainstream, how do we do that in a fair, smooth way? And I think that's for people who can afford, for some of that, there might be people who can afford $3,000 or $4,000, but would prefer not to pay that right up front out of pocket and would maybe think, I might be happier with these rules if I'm getting some financing help, right? And so it's not kind of this additional burden. And then there's also plenty of folks that don't fall into qualifying for subsidies, but we live in a very expensive area, and probably most people don't have that extra cash on hand.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That's the $90 million question.
Yes, that's the $90 million, yes.
Zoe, can I just one, there's a question for you for clarification is this 90 million that we're talking about here would be for the heat pump water heaters, right? Like specifically, so the BACMed rule, whereas the rest of our programs, we're looking at whole home electrification, we're looking at some other pieces as well, but this money would be for BACMed compliance, basically, which means it would be heat pump water heaters. That's correct?
That's right. So ensuring everybody can kind of participate in this transition without that painful upfront cost.
It's going to hit a lot of people.
Yeah, and just to clarify more on that, so the 2% that we currently transfer in the budget every year, that stays, that's irrespective of this, okay.
Yeah, this is all new.
Yes.
I'm happy to
Director
show some
Meadows?
slides on that in a second, but.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Klein. So Zoe, I was going to say, I think when you started at the bottom and worked your way up earlier in the presentation, you actually did what I would consider to be the proper priority order. So I want to make the way you've described local and emerging technologies, this is all about clean energy and it gets to our mission. Although I think here you're talking about tactics to leverage technologies to get a better or more robust supply of clean. But to me, that is really getting to what we've been wrestling with over time, which is we can't even buy the clean energy. So to me, that's particularly important. And then we've had discussion looking at what is the top one here, but in some senses I'd say is the least important. It's important, but the benefit delivered to the customer is so low. I mean, we've had this discussion before. It's, a couple dollars at most a month, as you showed in earlier slides. I do think that we have to be always lower than PG&E, and maybe we can have a policy as to whether that changes and how we decide or whatever. But in reality, the benefit to customers of the discount stabilization, no matter what the discount is negligible. So, I don't think we should lose sight of that. Whereas the other two, local and emerging technologies is key to the mission, might be a longer term value proposition for customers. And the middle one is something that they can see and feel as regulations go into play. So I just wanted to make an observation in case that's helpful as you think about moving forward with these recommendations over time.
Thank you. Director Martinez-Beltran.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions. My first question is, how do we see this working or impacting with new housing and the appliance, the building codes and all of that? How is that as far as cost? I mean, what percentage, I guess, is that of this?
So the good news is any new housing that is built, it's either going to be built all electric, in most instances with the heat pumps already there. And so the replacement cost when you replace a heat pump with a heat pump is actually very similar to replacing gas with gas, because what makes replacing a heat pump more expensive is when you have to kind of run new wires and conduit. So hopefully I'm answering your question, but what I'm saying is for those homes that are built all electric or built with a pre-wiring, they won't really need, so you've all done that work to ensure that those, I think we estimate around 4,000 or so homes that were built all electric under REACH codes are already ready.
Okay.
That's the pre-readiness that we're talking about.
It's very minimal. So
That's right.
That shouldn't hold anything up
Yeah,
there.
that's
Okay.
right.
Okay. And then what about, as far as looking at the funding for residential customers, and especially if we're talking about customers that might be economically just disadvantaged, about funding that through bills and having the program dollars go towards that. So basically, I mean, you need to pay, if you don't pay your bill, you don't have electricity. So there's a high motivation to pay your bill. If they're not able to fund it, they don't have credit or whatever the issue is, and they're not able to obtain their own financing for that, that they could use a program through SVCE. I would love to see something like that. And then we have, some portion of this fund, maybe it doesn't go to wherever it doesn't go, but it goes here so that people have the ability to actually have that resource.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what I hear you saying is we have this on-bill financing pilot now. Is that something that could be expanded with these funds? And that's exactly the type of program that could be expanded. I want to be clear. We've set aside what we think is a pretty conservative estimate of what's actually needed. But then in terms of how that funding would get directed, whether it's through on-bill financing, whether it's through a direct install program, whether it's through contractor programs, we would then, once we have a sense of the scale of funding that's coming, be able to start to plan and design those proposals to bring back to the board for approval. But the answer is yes, absolutely. On-bill financing could be a key piece of how the money is delivered.
I think
that 90 million.
I would love to see that be, something that we prioritize. I think it would really help people get there. So that's great. Look forward to seeing that. And then just talking about, using our new technologies, which is always, of course, when I think of that, I think of the youth, I think of young professionals, I think of their ideas being so unjaded like some of ours. And so I'm wondering where, what is the idea for the partnerships there that we haven't maybe, is there anything new? We've had some conversations here already, working with the colleges, but is there anything maybe in the last month as you're thinking about and putting this project together that has stood out to you as maybe an opportunity?
I'm going to answer in two ways, and then anybody else feel free to jump in or let me know I'm not directly answering your question. So the local emerging technology that we're thinking about here is really like power supply technology. And so there for sure could be technologies that are coming out of our community, but these, even to the point that we would be investing in them to be part of our power portfolio, they would be pretty advanced technologies, way beyond really early stage technology. That kind of investment is happening through our innovation on-ramp and other collaborations with youth that would be part of our standard programs budget.
Okay.
That's how I read that. And yeah, go ahead.
I'll jump in just to say kind of to that piece and maybe to some of your previous questions as well. One thing that I'm really excited about with this idea of, putting kind of a target together and saying, okay, for the first 3 years here, this is the kind of funding we want to deploy is effectively this will be starting in 2027, right? When it actually is needed. We'll be needing to do setup obviously well before then. But we are going to make decisions on how we deploy this funding based on the things we've been learning with the current portfolio of programs and all the funding we've been setting aside and deploying already. And so some of that has been used for partnership, like youth partnership and engagement. Some of it's been used for on-bill financing. And so as we look at all these things, some of it's been used for just no-cost direct install. So it's not even that a low-income customer finances it, we just pay for it, so there's nothing on their bill. We're gonna look at all of that and kind of see what was effective, what were the costs, how would we scale this up, so that when we figure out how exactly to deploy this funding to best support the full population, we can do the things that worked best and not do the things that didn't work as well, and do some tweaks and kind of work our way through that. So that's kind of the life cycle that I'm seeing here.
That's great, thank you. I'm wondering too, with young businesses or young ideas, so would we ever?
That's not this program. If we're short on time.
Okay, fine, okay.
So.
Yeah, I can have that offline.
One sentence, just a comment, no need to respond. If the BACMA 2027 gets delayed, I suggest to think that if we are ready with the money, we start rolling this up because a lot of homes are going to get hit as they burn up. Just a comment.
Really good point.
So,
Thanks. Director Tyson.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate seeing this in advance so I could look at it, and I thought it was a well thought out program. You had almost equal in 3 different areas. I like the multi-year strategy. We started that with the discount, I think about a year or so ago, so that we weren't just, what's the word? Anyway, snapping people around. With respect to the last one, I'm a little concerned about the new technologies, and also I'm on the distribution of UC Berkeley Climate Action Network, and there's a lot of schemes out there, and I want us to stay clear of those. And I tell you, the demand modulation, I don't recall the exact word, that's the most interesting thing to me of those areas. So I don't know how I'm sorry I had to miss that section to see how you're dividing those pieces, but I would not say it's not our role to do advanced technology, but if we can get demand leveling, you know what I'm saying? That's the low hanging fruit.
Yeah, and I think that more than likely, given the amount of dollars that we set and the fact that it's a third priority and depending on how we allocate, that the types of programs or technology that would kind of feed would be things like demand flexibility, virtual power plants, things that we can actually develop locally as well. And so it's not going to be us investing in hydrogen or small nuclear reactor or something like that in our service territory with $100 million.
Next to you.
But yeah, I do want that. We are very short for time and we have another really big item.
And so I did want to bring one thing. So I was going to lead on to that. Local microgrids, whatever we can do, for whether or not it's virtual or real microgrids, because I do think that, especially with power supply shutoff, microgrids are going to become very important over the next few years as we have issues from that standpoint. And looking at every fire station, every police station in our jurisdiction as conceivably a focus of making sure that if the power's turned off, at least they're not real, they currently rely on generators. We can have microgrids and they become the locations where residents need to go to charge their car, phone, whatever, to make sure that they have connection. Anyway, I'll leave it at that.
Resiliency.
Yeah,
Yeah.
fantastic. And
build it into builders revenue projects. Seriously.
okay. We have about five more minutes. We're going to go into this next piece quickly. Thank you for this input. The next piece, we've talked about what should be funded. I got some interesting input. And then this next piece is how you would allocate potential funding. So we've got 3. I will go through, and they're actually pretty straightforward because we think this needs to be dynamic based on the different priorities, but also straightforward so that it's really transparent. Right, so the first one would be basically a strict waterfall. So the first priority, and in this instance, we said discount stabilization. It could be any 3. These are illustrative, right? It would be discount stabilization. Nothing else gets funded until that one is funded. With $40 million, it could get us about 53% of the way to that $75 million target. The other 2 priorities wouldn't get money in this next year. Bumping this up, and again, you could put power supply 2 at the top, would be to do the scalable support for pollution-free appliances as the very first. That would get us about 44% of the way there towards that target in the first year, assuming $40 million. A third option, which is the option that staff would recommend at this point,
is a percent allocation, basically a more balanced approach that would get us partially way there for each of these three priorities. And we, at this point, laid out an example of 40, 40, 20. This is a summary slide of those different options. And I'll pause if there's, that's it. I'll pause if there's any questions or comments on this.
Questions, comments?
A quick question, can we change the percentage allocation as we move forward? This is going back to, I personally think we're going to be hit with a lot of residents who are going to be caught by surprise, big bills when they have to switch appliances. And so at that time, if we need to reduce the discount and move more money in there, I think we should be prepared for that. That's my gut reaction.
Last slide.
We have old housing stock. Just a comment, question, whatever you consider it. In the interest of time, I don't need the answer right now.
The last slide makes sense.
And the answer is anything can get moved.
Yeah, that's it. Just wanted to give you feedback on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other comments, questions?
I really like the way that it's distributed. I'm very curious to hear more about the emerging technology, but all my burning questions will wait.
Thank you. Other comments? And I think, option C to me seems the reasonable thing. Any members of the public wishing to speak on this item?
No hands raised, Chair.
Any final comments? Okay, thank you very much. I will move on to item number 7. A request the SVCE Executive Committee recommend the SVCE Board of Directors approve the policy updates as part of the agency policy streamlining project. What's your report?
Thank you. Thank you all. Saving the best for last, of course.
Testing their way.
Exactly. And I know that we are feeling tight on time, but our next slide will show us that it's actually a much narrower decision, a recommendation that we're looking for today than was in the staff report that was posted. And apologies for that. But if you've done the reading on the HR and the GA policies that are struck there, those will be coming to the board meeting, so you have not wasted your time. Here, we're just talking about adopting the 4 bullets that aren't struck on the left and retiring the 2 bullets on the right. These ones that are struck are actually under the Finance and Administration Committee's purview, so they will be looking at those on Monday along with the other policies. So apologies that those are included in the staff report, but it should narrow our conversation today a bit. Any questions about that before I keep going? Okay.
One second.
Yep. Take your time.
All right, I need to. Okay, thanks. No, you're good. Go ahead.
Cool.
I just want to. You're good.
Love it. All right, so this is just a snapshot of the process. So this all started back in November of last year at a discussion with the Finance Administration Committee, where staff and the committee were all discussing it would be good to revisit all of the agency's policies, ensuring sort of the right level of detail is there and making sure that we're reviewing them on a regular basis. So we took 2024 really to kind of do that, to dig in and try to understand where we could update, where we could reduce language, where we could eliminate redundancies, and transfer extensive and also sensitive, either from an IT data security perspective, or some of the finance pieces into standards. And so we're keeping policies, and those will be approved at the board level, but we've defined sort of this new structure where below policies there's standards. Those would be adopted by the CEO, and they would sort of implement those policies. So policies are at a high level, enabling or prohibiting conduct. These standards are telling us sort of staff how to do that with more granularity. And then we may even develop in our planning to develop procedures underneath those standards that would also be approved by the CEO. That are sort of like step-by-steps for certain areas. So that's sort of the, moving to mature the policy structure to make it easier to follow, easier to maintain, give us a little more flexibility to adapt to changes in laws, changes in personnel, changes in how we operate. That's the new structure we're proposing. And really, we're trying to keep the key policy direction at the board level. And so today, we're at the executive committee talking about a set of those policies. On Monday, the Finance Administration Committee will talk about the rest of them. And then in December, they'll all go, so long as they're recommended by the committees, they'll go to the board for adoption. Shortly after that, staff will adopt the standards. that relate to those policies. And then in the near term, we'll be rolling those out to staff with trainings and to some of the new board members as well, and some of you all in terms of the changes. And in the long term, we've identified sort of a regular cadence for reviewing each of the policies, as well as cadence for training specific staff that the policies relate to. This is just a sort of a snapshot at the sheer number of documents that we were dealing with and sort of just really what's happened with them. So the green, we're keeping 21 policies. We're retiring 30, roughly. We're developing new standards, 30 of those, and then we're updating the HR handbook as well. And that's globally, that's not just for the ones in front of the executive committee today, that's all of them. So you'll see the same slide at the board meeting. And you can see there's a bit of a breakdown. Human resources and IT is where most of the retired policies are happening, and that's again moving things out of sort of the board approval to give us more flexibility to update in HR land and to keep things that are more sensitive sort of out of the public view in the IT space, wholesale. That's a snapshot. And so today we're talking about a handful of the general and administrative policies. And this just gives you, even though in the staff report you had redlined and clean versions of the policies, this is sort of a summary of what's happening in those policies. And there's really, honestly, not a ton in the policies that we're looking at today. Definitely, from my perspective, really nothing particularly controversial. So, we had a vehicle use policy for the agency-owned vehicle, the Ford Lightning, and we had a separate use policy for our electric charging stations. And so we've merged that into one policy because they're kind of related, to try to streamline. The Public Records Act was updated to include, there's exceptions that are available, so staff are curious what those are. So now they're in the policy and folks can see them. And it's just out of the statute. So nothing really fancy happening there. And then, back to sort of the more general, even lower priority updates than those two. There's a new standard that goes with the vehicle and charger use policies. So there were a lot of details about what staff had to keep in the glove box and certain procedures about how they do things. That was all in the policy. We've pulled some of those operational details into a standard. The CEO absence and hybrid meetings policies were refreshed with just honestly a lot of administrative cleanup, really nothing particularly substantive there. No changes to the code of ethics, vice chair and chair vacancy policies, ticket and pass distribution policies. So just noting that. And then the California Public Records Act policy also had a little bit of additional administrative clarification based on what's actually required. We were kind of overstating what we needed to do in a piece of it. And so that's a summary of what's being changed. Happy to pause here if there's any questions.
Are there questions?
How many PRA requests have we received, if any, last year?
It's hard to say. We've had quite a bit of an uptick recently, so I would guess maybe a handful this year.
Because sometimes those can be very expensive to fulfill.
Burdensome for sure.
Yeah.
Time consuming.
Yeah, it's uptaken. And, we're keeping an eye and chatting with other CCAs about the PRAs that they're seeing as well. And there are some sort of concerning trends that we're seeing, and just in terms of needing to be responsive and potentially in response to some burdensome requests. So I think we're looking at that and considering that as we're updating these policies and trying to kind of position ourselves to keep the records we need to keep, not keep the ones we don't need to keep, and just streamline that to the extent we can while being transparent in our work. Right.
Thank you. Continue.
And this is sort of just a visual snapshot of what's happening across the general administrative policies. So this includes the handful that we're looking at today, as well as the ones that are going to the Finance and Admin Committee. So there's the policies, there's a few standards that have been developed under them, and then there's a few retired policies. You can see sort of the titles of them up above. It just gives you kind of a visual of, wholesale what's happening. And so next steps, you saw this a bit on the slide above, but we're going to the Finance and Administration Committee on Monday. We'll bring it to the board in December. Shortly after that, as quickly as we can get the standards finalized, we'll be adopting those. And then we'll be rolling out to staff and board members in Q1 of next year, and continuing that continuous improvement, regular reviews and regular staff trainings on all the policies going forward. And that is it. Any questions?
Questions from directors? Director
Not
Walker?
really a question. Thank you. And I believe Sally and I were on the finance committee 1 year ago when something was picked up and we all felt. So this is great to see. It's taken a lot of work. You have made it look very simple. There's a long list of policies that you have to clean up, which make no sense to keep at the board level. And there's no need for that information. Transparency, I stand for transparency in every way. This is the best way to do it. I'll keep it short and sweet. Great job, and thank you so much for that. Love the fact that you're adding it to training incoming board members. I would say training board members, because I speak for myself. I have a pretty good memory, but we all have too many things that we do. And it's hard to keep track of things. Our focus is our own cities, and the way we do business in our own cities is what most of us remember. So I always like to use my example, so remind us every year of the key things. I'd certainly appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. Other comments from directors? Is there any member of the public who wishes to speak on this item?
No hands raised, Chair.
Any final comments?
Oh,
Yes, Chair.
it's almost like you replace SVCE with the city of Monte Sereno. And we should do the same thing. Some of our stuff is so back in the dark ages. And anyways, I'm very impressed with this. And I think that it's good to have gone through the analysis and then get it done, knock it out, implement. So I commend SVCE.
And I'll second that. It's like definitely when we brought this up, or when Monica brought this up and started discussing this, it's too many of our organizations rely on, don't have the bandwidth, don't make the bandwidth to reevaluate. Mm-hmm. And that's always an issue. And so you end up with these policies that we're stuck with for years. And so indefinitely things that shouldn't be outward facing or become, it's like at the discretion of the CEO, which is like, there's certain things which it makes total sense that the organization needs to be nimble, needs to be flexible. And that's why you make certain things a little more defined, but things that are flexible, that are internally focused should be under the purveyance of the CEO. And to me, that's an important part of that process. So thank you for going through this effort. With that, is there a motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Or George seconded it.
Great.
Thank you, Director Tyson. May we have a voice vote?
Yes. Chair Klein?
Yes.
Vice Chair Makachek?
Aye.
Director Tyson?
Yes.
Director Walia?
Aye.
Director Martinez-Beltran?
Aye.
Director Meadows?
Yes.
Carries unanimously.
Thank you. We'll move on to final committee and staff remarks. Anyone have any comments?
Happy Thanksgiving.
Vice Chair.
I would like to make a comment and kind of shout out to Beth Trenchard. I've been doing quite a bit of work with her on the pilot process for, and
The hourly flex pricing program.
yeah, and it's interesting. PG&E is a little behind times, and anyways, I want to compliment her on working with me on that.
Thank you. Any other comments? I just want to thank staff. We did our EV Expo over the weekend. Thankfully, it wasn't a rainy day, but I heard a lot of positive comments from that event, and we do these probably at least every 6 months, if not more, from a Sunnyvale standpoint, and it's been very positive. And I just want to thank everyone for a good year. It's like this is our last meeting from an executive standpoint, so have a good Thanksgiving. And of course, the holiday mixer, as well as the board meeting on the 11th, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to add the holiday mixer. Staff is putting together a very community-focused thing, and they're bringing their special little tiny home.
Very good.
Dream home.
Tiny dreams.
We finished early, I'm sorry to rush you. Another 15
I had a feeling our policies would go quickly, but I don't want to take that for granted. Okay, with that, we will adjourn the meeting at 2:40. Thank you for everyone who attended. Thanks, Sally.
Thanks,
Take care.
Good job, Zoe.
Everybody.
35 minutes.